During my first week after my husband's funeral, my son Tommy said to me, "We don't need another mouth to feed in this house, Mom," and found me a job cleaning dishes at a small bakery. I smiled and agreed, hiding my hurt feelings behind a gentle face. But when I walked into that bakery, Tommy realized something. He had no idea who his mother really was, and now his world would turn upside down. Before we continue, please subscribe to Grandma Stories and tell us where you're watching from in the comments. I have wonderful news to share. Today I buried my dear husband Henry. Finally, the funeral was over. Tommy's coffee cup shook in his hands as he set it down. His wife Sarah's eyes went wide, her mouth hanging open in shock. I looked at them both, hoping for kind words, maybe even a hug during this difficult time. Instead, silence filled our tiny kitchen like a heavy blanket. Tommy spoke first, his face turning red with anger. "What? Mom, you can't just expect to live here for free. Did you even think about what this means for us?" "Of course I did," I said, my smile fading away. 50 years of marriage, son. I thought we could comfort each other." "Comfort?" Sarah's voice cut through the air like a sharp knife. She put down her juice glass with a loud bang. "Tommy, your mother thinks we're going to take care of her for nothing." The warmth in my heart started turning cold. This wasn't how I imagined this moment during my drive home from the cemetery. I pictured gentle hugs, maybe Tommy telling me how sorry he felt for me losing Dad. Instead, my son's face showed something I'd never seen before. Pure annoyance with his own mother. "Listen, Mom." Tommy leaned forward, using his boss voice instead of his son voice. "I'm not keeping an extra mouth to feed. You need a job tomorrow. I don't care if it's washing floors or folding clothes, but you're not sitting around here living off my money." Each word hit me like someone throwing rocks at my heart. I stared at this young man I had raised, whose school supplies I had bought, whose scraped knees I had bandaged when he was little. The kitchen light made dark shadows on his face, making him look like a stranger. Sarah nodded her head up and down like she agreed completely. "Margaret, you're 62, not 90. Lots of people your age still work. My friend's grandmother serves food at restaurants until she was 70. But I started to say." "You thought wrong," Tommy interrupted me. "Do you think money grows on trees? Do you know how much it costs to keep this house running? To buy food and pay bills? I work 55 hours every week at the construction company just to keep us safe." The funny thing was, Tommy didn't know the real truth about money. Not yet, anyway. My dinner got cold while I listened to their harsh words. The chicken soup Sarah had made, my favorite kind, now looked terrible under the bright kitchen light. Everything about this moment felt wrong and twisted, like looking at my life through a broken mirror. "You're right," I said softly, my voice almost too quiet to hear. "I should have talked to you about this first." Tommy's angry face got a little softer, maybe hearing sadness in my voice. "Look, Mom, I'm not trying to be mean, but reality is reality. We can't afford someone who doesn't work." Someone who doesn't work. That phrase buzzed in my head like an angry bee as I nodded, pretending to be the ashamed mother. I said I would think about what they told me. "Good." Sarah gathered up the dirty plates with quick, sharp movements. "The sooner you find work, the better for everyone." They walked away to the living room, leaving me alone at the kitchen table. I could hear the TV turn on, their voices going back to normal talking, like nothing had happened, like they hadn't just broken my heart into tiny pieces in 10 minutes. I stayed sitting there, looking at the empty chairs where my family had been just moments before. The house made small creaking sounds around me, and somewhere far away, a neighbor's dog was barking. Normal sounds of a normal evening that felt anything but normal. Slowly I stood up and started cleaning the leftover dishes, my hands moving by themselves while my mind tried to understand what had just happened. They saw me as a burden. After everything I'd done, everything I'd given up for them, they thought their mother was nothing more than an unwanted expense. I turned off the kitchen light and walked toward my small bedroom at the back of the house, leaving Tommy and Sarah to watch their evening shows. Tomorrow would bring new discoveries, but tonight I needed to think. I lay down on my narrow bed fully dressed, staring at the ceiling where shadows from passing cars made moving patterns across the white paint. The house had gotten quiet for the evening, but my mind was spinning with the dinner conversation. 50 years as a loving wife, and this was my reward. Being called a burden by my own son. The bedroom was small, with just basic furniture. A single bed, one small table, and an old dresser that had seen better days. Family photos sat on top of the dresser. Tommy's high school graduation, his wedding day, Christmas mornings where we all looked happy together. Had that joy been fake? Voices came through the thin wall between my room and the master bedroom. At first just whispers, but getting louder as Tommy and Sarah got ready for bed. "I can't believe she just announced Dad's death like that," Tommy was saying, his voice carrying clearly through the wall. I turned toward the wall, suddenly paying close attention. They were talking about me. "She thinks she can just sit at home while I work." Tommy's voice got higher. 50 years of marriage. So what? That doesn't give her the right to live free on my salary. Sarah's answer came through muffled but clear. "What if she says no to working? What if she just sits around watching TV all day? Then we'll take her social security check and put her in a nursing home," Tommy said. "I'm tired of supporting dead weight." The words hit me like icy water. Nursing home. Dead weight. I grabbed my blanket tight, my hands shaking in the dim light coming through my curtains. "She's been living here for free ever since Dad got sick 2 years ago," Sarah continued. "Free meals, free room, and now she doesn't even want to work. She has some nerve." I closed my eyes tight, remembering all the checks I had written over the years. $31,000 for Tommy's trade school education. $12,000 for his wedding to Sarah. And they were living in my house. The house Henry and I had bought and paid for completely. "The old lady doesn't understand how expensive everything is now," Tommy said. "Electric bills, food, car payments. She thinks it's still 1980. Maybe we should give her a deadline," Sarah suggested. 1 week to find work or she has to leave." "Perfect," Tommy agreed. "And if she complains, we'll remind her that people who don't pay bills can't make demands." Their laughter drifted through the wall, casual and cruel. I lay there listening to every word, every dismissive chuckle, every casual mention of how useless I was. These were the people I'd sacrificed for, the family I'd loved without asking for anything in return. The house got quiet again as they prepared for sleep. I stayed perfectly still, understanding this new reality. My son, the little boy I'd taught to tie his shoes, whose monsters under the bed I'd chased away, whose dreams I'd encouraged, thought of me as nothing more than an expensive problem. A nursing home. The phrase repeated in my mind like a drumbeat. They'd already planned to get rid of me, already decided my future would be with strangers who were paid to pretend they cared. I thought about my friends whose children threw them beautiful retirement parties. Janet's daughter took her on a cruise to Alaska. Helen's son built her a small apartment attached to his house. I got threats and ultimatums over chicken soup. But as I lay there in the darkness, something else began to grow beneath the hurt and shock, a cold, careful anger that surprised me with how strong it felt. They wanted to play games with their mother's future. They wanted to treat Margaret Wilson like some helpless old woman who had no choices. Maybe it was time they learned exactly who Margaret Wilson really was. I closed my eyes and began to make plans. Sleep did not come easily. I lay perfectly still in the darkness, listening to the house getting quiet around me while memories of all my sacrifices played in my head like old movies. The silence now felt different. Not peaceful, but heavy with hidden truths. 50 years of marriage. I had worked hard, saving every extra penny for Tommy's future, taking double shifts at the phone company when he needed money for school, weekend jobs when his trade school bills arrived. All those years of eating simple meals while my paycheck went toward his education at Portland Technical College. I remembered the night he called home, worried about tuition going up. "Don't worry, sweetheart," I told him, already figuring out how many extra hours I'd need to work. "Your mom will take care of it." And I did, trading sleep for his dreams, my comfort for his opportunities. His wedding day flashed through my memory like a bright photograph. Sarah in her white dress, Tommy smiling in his rented suit. Both of them completely unaware that their simple wedding had quietly cost twice what they planned. I'd covered the extra money without saying a word, watching them dance to music I'd paid for, eating cake I'd bought, celebrating love I'd made possible. Through it all I'd lived simply, not because I was poor but because I chose to. I let them think I struggled to pay bills, while my real savings grew quietly in bank accounts they never knew existed. Better to be seen as generous than wealthy, or so I'd believed. My fingers touched the worn bedsheet and I thought about Robert Chen, the owner of Chen's Bakery. 22 years ago, when his small family business was just a dream in his head, I'd believed in what he wanted to build. $40,000 of investment money, quietly given to help a friend's dream come true. We'd shaken hands in his tiny apartment kitchen, two people betting on the future. Chen's Bakery now had 6 locations across the city. Tommy had eaten their birthday cakes for years, never knowing his mother had helped make those delicious treats possible. "All right, Tommy," I whispered to myself. "This game can be played by 2 people." The photo on my nightstand caught a tiny bit of streetlight. Tommy at age 7, missing his front teeth and grinning, holding the baseball mitt I'd saved 3 months to buy. That sweet boy had grown into a man who would steal his mother's social security and abandon her to strangers. But he'd made one crucial mistake. He saw weakness where there was only kindness, mistook generosity for desperation, assumed his mother's simple lifestyle meant his mother was powerless. Tomorrow I would surprise them both by agreeing to work. Let them think they'd won this argument. Let them feel superior while I positioned myself exactly where I needed to be. Sometimes the best lessons required patience, and I'd spent 62 years learning how to wait for the right moment. The clock now read 1:15 in the morning. In 6 hours, I would begin teaching my son the difference between charity and strength. He wanted to see his mother humbled and embarrassed. He'd get his wish, right up until the moment he realized who was really holding the power in this situation. I pulled my blanket up to my chin and finally allowed myself to sleep. Morning would bring new possibilities, and I intended to be well rested for what came next. Morning coffee was already hot when I walked into the kitchen. Tommy stood by the counter in his work clothes, while Sarah spread jam on toast at the table. Both looked up as I appeared, their faces mixing curiosity with leftover anger from last night's conversation. "Tommy," I said, sitting down in my usual chair, "I've been thinking about your words. You're absolutely right." The coffee mug stopped halfway to Tommy's lips. Sarah's knife froze mid-spread, leaving a blob of strawberry jam hanging over her toast. They'd clearly expected another argument, more begging about wanting to grieve my husband in peace. "Seriously?" Tommy set down his mug with obvious suspicion in his voice. "You're not going to fight us on this? What would be the point?" I kept my voice steady and reasonable. "A woman my age should help with expenses. I see that now." Sarah looked at her husband with questioning eyes, probably wondering if this was some kind of trick. They'd prepared for battle and found surrender instead. Tommy leaned against the counter, his boss personality coming out. "Well, since you're being smart about this, I might have a solution. There's a dishwasher position open at my friend's bakery. Chen's Bakery downtown." I felt a small smile try to appear on my face and quickly pushed it away. "That sounds perfect, Tommy. I accept the job." Just like that. Sarah's voice carried notes of disbelief and satisfaction at the same time. "You're willing to wash dishes for strangers. Honest work is honest work," I replied, meeting her stare directly. "When would I start?" Tommy's chest puffed out a little with his new authority over me. "Monday morning, 8 o'clock sharp. You'll be perfect for the job, quiet, follows directions, grateful for the opportunity." He paused, enjoying his next words. "The pay is minimum wage, of course. But people who don't pay bills can't be choosy, right?" There it was again, that phrase they'd laughed about through the thin walls last night. I nodded seriously, as if accepting both the job and the insult with equal grace and humility. "I'll need to call my friend Robert about hiring you," Tommy continued with growing confidence. "But I'm sure he'll understand the family situation. Probably feels sorry for you, actually." Robert, my oldest friend, my business partner, the man whose kitchen table I'd sat at 22 years ago discussing dreams and investments. "That's very kind of you to help arrange this," I said, letting just enough gratitude creep into my voice to make them feel generous and important. Sarah reached across the table and patted my hand like I was a small child. "See, this wasn't so difficult, Margaret. You just needed to face reality about your situation." My situation. If only she knew the truth. "I appreciate you both helping me understand," I said. "It'll be good to have purpose again, to contribute something meaningful to our family income." Tommy nodded with approval. "Exactly the attitude we wanted to see, Mom. Maybe this will work out after all." He pulled out his phone, probably to contact Robert about the dishwasher position. I watched him dial, imagining Robert's reaction when he received this particular phone call. "I'll make the call this afternoon," Tommy said. "Get everything set up for Monday morning." "Perfect," I replied, already picturing my first day back at Chen's Bakery. It would indeed be a homecoming, just not the kind Tommy was expecting. The conversation moved on to weekend plans and grocery shopping, but I barely listened. My mind was already planning Monday morning, calculating exactly how long it would take for the truth to come out. Very soon they'd learn that underestimating Margaret Wilson was the costliest mistake they'd ever made in their entire lives. Monday morning arrived bright and sunny. The weekend between my agreement and today had passed in a blur of Tommy's proud preparations. He'd happily told Robert about solving his mother problem, bought rubber gloves for me to use, and explained my duties with barely hidden satisfaction and Jill. I'd played along perfectly, nodding gratefully while inside I counted down to this very moment. At 8:30 in the morning I sat in my kitchen, sipping coffee and reading the morning newspaper. Through the window I could see neighbors heading to work, their daily routines unchanged by the small revolution brewing in my house. The rubber gloves Tommy had bought stayed untouched in their package by the door, props in the theater of his expectations. My phone stayed quiet until 8:45. Then it started ringing loudly. "Mom, where are you?" Tommy's voice crackled with fury and panic through the phone speaker. "My friend Robert just called me angry. He was waiting for the new dishwasher, and nobody showed up to work." "Oh my goodness," I said, putting just the right tone of confused concern in my voice. "What time was I supposed to be there?" 8 o'clock. We discussed this every single day this week. How could you forget? I paused, letting his worry build before responding with carefully measured confusion. "I'm so sorry, Tommy. Old age, sometimes things just slip away from me. These old brains aren't what they used to be anymore." "This isn't about your brain." His voice rose another level. "I vouched for you with Robert. I told him you'd be reliable, that hiring family was a smart move. Now I look like a complete fool." "Perfect." I imagined Robert's confusion, probably wondering why Tommy was so personally invested in hiring an elderly dishwasher for minimum wage. My old friend was nothing if not polite, but he'd certainly noticed how strange this whole situation was. "I feel terrible about this misunderstanding," I continued, maintaining my performance of elderly confusion. "What did Mr. Chen say exactly?" "He asked why I was so personally involved in the hiring process." Tommy's voice carried the bitter taste of professional embarrassment. "I had to explain you were my mother, that you lived at home and needed the work. The whole conversation was humiliating." Interesting. Robert hadn't revealed our long friendship, keeping his business private even when presented with this odd situation. He was probably trying to puzzle out why Margaret Wilson's son was offering Margaret Wilson a minimum wage job at Margaret Wilson's own investment. "Maybe I could come in this afternoon," I suggested helpfully. "Make up for lost time and show how sorry I am." "No," Tommy shouted. "Tomorrow you will be at work at 7:45 sharp. No excuses." He paused, probably remembering he was speaking to his supposedly forgetful mother. Just don't let this happen again, Mom. My reputation is on the line here. Of course, sweetheart. I understand completely. After he hung up, I sat back in my chair and allowed myself a moment of deep satisfaction. Phase 1 had worked perfectly. Tommy was rattled, embarrassed in front of his friend, questioning his mother's ability to do simple things. The careful authority he'd built around this arrangement was already cracking like an egg. Tomorrow would bring Phase 2, and I had several hours to prepare the next surprise. But for now, I'd accomplished exactly what I'd intended. I'd reminded Tommy that even when he thought he controlled everything, his mother could still find ways to disrupt his plans. I folded the newspaper and walked toward my computer. Phase 3 would require more preparation, but the foundation was already laid solid as a rock. With Tommy's angry phone call still echoing in my mind, I moved to the small desk in my bedroom, where a manila folder waited patiently. I'd been preparing this particular surprise for 3 months, ever since the evening I discovered Sarah's secret. It had been a cold February afternoon when I noticed Henderson Tax Services letterheads scattered across the kitchen counter. Sarah had been careless, leaving work documents beside her coffee cup while she talked on the phone in the living room. My experienced eye, 40 years of managing household budgets and reading financial papers, immediately caught the irregularities in the tax forms she was preparing. Business expense deductions: $8,400. Equipment purchases: $12,600. The number seemed way too high for the small businesses she usually helped. I'd balanced checkbooks for decades. These figures raised immediate red flags in my mind. Interesting, I'd whispered to myself that day, carefully taking pictures of the documents with my phone while Sarah chatted loudly in the next room. Why does Sarah have tax papers with such strange numbers on them? That evening I'd called my old friend Patricia Rodriguez, a tax specialist who owed me several favors from our working days together. Patricia, could you check something for me about Henderson Tax Services? I'd asked casually. Completely private, of course. I'm curious about their business practices with small company deductions. 3 days later, Patricia had quietly provided me with information that made my heart sink. Sarah had been systematically creating fake business expenses for her clients, then splitting the extra tax refund money with them. Office supplies that cost $400 became $1,200 on tax forms. A $600 equipment purchase became $1,600 on government paperwork. 6 months of careful fraud hidden behind falsified receipts and altered invoices. Now sitting at my computer, I opened the folder and spread out the evidence side by side. The proof was absolutely clear and undeniable. Sarah's fake tax documents photographed from our kitchen table alongside the real business records Patricia had discreetly obtained. The pattern was obvious, systematic, and completely illegal. I began typing the anonymous email message. Dear Internal Revenue Service, I wrote carefully. I am writing to inform you of serious tax fraud being committed by Henderson Tax Services. Your tax preparer Sarah Cook has been systematically creating false business deductions for multiple clients. Please find attached documented evidence comparing filed tax returns with actual business expenses. The pattern spans several months and represents substantial fraud against the government. I recommend immediate investigation of all tax returns prepared by Mrs. Cook. I signed it a concerned citizen and attached the scanned evidence files, side-by-side comparisons of Sarah's fake forms versus actual business receipts, photographs of suspicious documents from our kitchen table, and a detailed timeline showing the growing pattern of tax fraud. My finger hovered over the send button. Once this email reached the IRS, Sarah's career would crumble within days. Her professional reputation would be destroyed completely. Criminal charges would almost certainly follow. But then I remembered her voice through the thin walls. Maybe we should give her a deadline, 1 week to find work or she has to leave. Her laughter as she discussed taking my social security and warehousing me with strangers who didn't know my name. Clicked send. The message disappeared into cyberspace, carrying 28 attachments of undeniable proof. By evening, possibly within the next few hours, Sarah would face the consequences of both her fraud and her cruelty to her husband's mother. I closed the laptop and carefully fed the physical documents into my small paper shredder, watching months of preparation transform into tiny ribbons. The evidence had served its purpose perfectly. Now it needed to disappear without a trace. Phase 3 was complete. Tommy had been embarrassed at work this morning. Sarah would face career destruction this afternoon. Tonight they'd both return home to a mother they assumed was helpless and confused, never suspecting she'd orchestrated their simultaneous downfall. I made myself tea and settled into my comfortable chair to wait for the evening's revelations and drama. The front door slammed at 6:52 in the evening, followed by the sound of high heels clicking rapidly across the wooden floor. I looked up from my evening newspaper, pretending to be surprised at the urgency in Sarah's footsteps. She appeared in the living room doorway, her face red and blotchy with tears. Mascara smudged beneath swollen eyes. Her usually perfect appearance was completely disheveled, blouse wrinkled, hair falling out of its neat ponytail, hands shaking as she clutched her purse like a lifeline. "Sarah, what happened?" I set down the paper, rising halfway from my chair with practiced concern and worry. "Why are you crying, honey? I'm getting fired." The words tumbled out between choking sobs. "Someone sent the IRS some documents about my tax work. Financial records and stuff. They think I've been cheating on people's taxes." "What terrible luck," I said, moving toward her. My voice carefully calibrated to show shock and sympathy. "Who could have done such a terrible thing to you?" She collapsed into the armchair across from me, her composure completely shattered like broken glass. "I don't know. Someone anonymous sent detailed evidence to my boss and the government this afternoon. Bank records, tax forms, everything laid out like some kind of police investigation." I settled back into my seat, maintaining my expression of bewildered concern while internally cataloging every detail she revealed about her situation. "That sounds absolutely devastating and scary. What exactly are they claiming you did?" "They're saying I created fake business expenses, made up receipts, used false numbers on tax returns for personal money." Her voice broke completely. "Margaret, they have everything. Dates, amounts, even photographs of my work documents." Fascinating. The IRS had moved quickly, confronting her within hours of receiving my email. Government agencies clearly understood that tax fraud required immediate attention and action. "But surely this is some kind of misunderstanding," I said gently. "You're an honest person, Sarah. Anyone who knows you would say you have good character." "That's just it." She leaned forward desperately. "The evidence is so detailed, so specific and exact. Whoever did this has been watching me for months, writing down everything I did. It's like they knew exactly what they were looking for." Indeed, they did know. "Have you told Tommy yet?" I asked, allowing appropriate worry to creep into my voice. Her face crumpled further into despair. "No. How can I? He's already stressed about work, about the situation with you not showing up this morning." She looked up at me with pleading, desperate eyes. "Margaret, what am I going to do? If they fire me, if there are criminal charges, we'll lose everything we've worked for." Now, I said soothingly, moving to pat her shoulder in a grandmotherly gesture. "We'll figure this out together, sweetheart. Family supports family, right?" The irony wasn't lost on me. The woman who'd laughed about sending me to a nursing home was now seeking comfort from the very person she'd planned to abandon. "They've suspended me while they do a full investigation," she continued, wiping her nose with a tissue. "My boss said the evidence was too detailed to ignore. They're bringing in government auditors, reviewing every single tax return I've handled in the past 2 years." Government auditors. Patricia Rodriguez had certainly covered her tracks well when she'd helped me gather the initial evidence. The authentic business records she'd provided would perfectly support my anonymous allegations. "Is there any chance this could be resolved quietly?" I asked, maintaining my helpful tone. Perhaps if you spoke with your boss directly, explained your side of the story? My side. She laughed bitterly. What side? The documents don't lie, Margaret. Someone has built a perfect case against me, and I have no idea who or why they'd want to hurt me like this. The sound of Tommy's truck pulling into the driveway cut through her despair. We both heard his heavy footsteps on the front porch, his key turning in the lock with familiar sounds. Please, Sarah whispered urgently. Let me tell him myself about what happened. He's going to be absolutely devastated by this news. I nodded sympathetically, settling back to enjoy the evening's final act as Tommy's voice called out from the entryway. Sarah, I'm home and I've had the worst day. Tommy's heavy footsteps echoed through the hallway, each thud carrying the weight of his difficult day at work. When he appeared in the living room doorway, his shirt wrinkled and tie hanging loose around his neck, his expression immediately shifted from tired annoyance to sharp alarm at the scene before him. What's wrong with her? He dropped his lunchbox and rushed toward Sarah, who was still dabbing at her tear-streaked face. I come home to find my wife crying, and you're sitting there like nothing happened, Mom. Tommy, I didn't do anything, I began, maintaining my calm tone despite his accusing glare. Don't lie to me. His voice rose to a dangerous pitch. First you embarrassed me at work by not showing up this morning. Now you've upset Sarah somehow. What is wrong with you? Sarah raised her hand weakly, trying to interrupt his anger. Tommy, please. It's not your mother's fault. Then what is it? He whirled on her, his boss personality fully engaged, demanding answers with the same authority he probably used on his construction crew workers. Why are you crying? What happened today? They want to fire me, she said. The words burst from her lips like a dam breaking. Someone sent anonymous evidence to the IRS and my boss, claiming I've been cheating on people's tax returns. They've suspended me while they investigate. The color drained from Tommy's face as if someone had pulled a plug. He stood frozen, processing this information while his carefully constructed world continued to crumble around him like a house of cards. Tax fraud. He sank into the nearest chair, his earlier anger replaced by stunned disbelief. That's impossible. You're the most honest person I know. That's what I tried to tell them, Sarah continued, her voice gaining strength from his support. But whoever sent this information knew exactly what to look for. They had copies of tax forms, business records, everything perfectly documented and organized. I watched Tommy's face cycle through emotions like a slot machine. Confusion, denial, growing panic as the implications hit him. His mother missing work this morning. His wife facing criminal charges for tax fraud. Everything was spinning beyond his control. This can't be happening, he muttered, running his hands through his hair. Not now, when everything else is falling apart. What do you mean, everything else? Sarah asked, momentarily distracted from her own crisis by her husband's words. Tommy looked up at me with undisguised resentment burning in his eyes. Mother here decided to play games yesterday. Didn't show up for work after I personally vouched for her with my friend Robert. Made me look like a complete amateur. I explained that was just confusion about the time, I said gently. No more excuses. Tommy shot to his feet, pointing an accusing finger directly at me. Tomorrow you're coming to work with me, and you're working without any tricks, without any senior moments, without any nonsense. I'm driving you there personally to make sure you actually show up. Tommy, that's not necessary. I began. No more tricks. His voice cracked with desperation and fury. I've had it with both of you causing problems in my life. My reputation at work, my marriage, my entire future is under attack, and I'm not going to let it happen anymore. Sarah looked between us with growing confusion, trying to process this family conflict while dealing with her own catastrophe brewing around her. Don't worry, son, I said quietly, meeting his blazing stare with surprising calm and confidence. Tomorrow everything will be different. Something in my tone gave him pause. For just a moment, His aggressive posture wavered as he tried to interpret the meaning behind my words. "It better be," he said finally, his voice dropping to a threatening whisper. "Because if it's not, if you embarrass me one more time, I'm following through on every single promise I made about nursing homes and taking your social security check. Do you understand me, Mother?" I nodded solemnly, hiding the small smile that threatened to emerge on my face. Tomorrow would indeed be different. More different than Tommy could possibly imagine in his wildest dreams. The house fell into tense silence. 3 family members facing separate crises, none of them realizing that all their troubles stemmed from the same source. Morning came too soon for Tommy, but I'd slept peacefully, knowing this would be the final act of my carefully orchestrated play. I dressed methodically in the simple clothes he'd bought me for dishwashing, each piece a costume for the performance of a lifetime. Tommy was already in the kitchen when I appeared, gulping coffee with grim determination. His face bore the marks of a sleepless night, dark circles under his eyes, stubble he'd forgotten to shave, the tight expression of a man who decided to solve his problems through sheer force of will. "Ready?" he asked curtly, not bothering with morning pleasantries. "Ready," I replied, pulling on the apron that completed my dishwasher's uniform. The drive to Chen's Bakery passed in tense silence for the first 15 minutes. Portland's morning traffic gave Tommy something to focus his nervous energy on. His knuckles white as he gripped the steering wheel like his life depended on it. I sat quietly in the passenger seat, watching familiar neighborhoods pass by, counting down the minutes until everything changed forever. "Let me make something crystal clear," Tommy finally spoke, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Today there will be no confusion about time, no mysterious illnesses, no convenient memory lapses. You will show up, you will work, and you will make me look competent in front of my friend Robert." "I understand completely," I said, keeping my tone appropriately submissive and humble. "Do you?" He shot me a sideways glance. "Because yesterday's stunt nearly cost me my friendship with Robert." He asked pointed questions about my judgment, about why I was recommending unreliable people. Poor Robert. He must have been thoroughly confused by the whole situation, trying to understand why his business partner's son was so invested in hiring his business partner as minimum wage labor. "And no more tricks," Tommy continued, warming to his theme. "I know you probably think this is all some game, that you can manipulate situations to get your way, but those days are over. From now on, I'm in charge of this family." "Don't worry, son," I said, allowing just a hint of mysterious confidence to color my words. "Today, everything will be different." He glanced at me sharply, perhaps catching something in my tone that didn't match his expectations of a defeated old woman. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Just that I understand the situation better now," I replied carefully. "Sometimes it takes time to see things clearly." Chen's Bakery came into view, a warm, inviting building with large windows showing fresh bread and colorful cakes inside. Tommy had driven past this bakery hundreds of times over the years, never knowing his mother had helped make those delicious treats possible. "There it is," Tommy said, his voice mixing pride with anxiety. 6 locations across the city now. This is where successful people work, Mom. This is what real achievement looks like." Indeed it was. And today, Tommy would learn exactly how much achievement his family had really accomplished over the years. We pulled into the small parking lot, Tommy choosing a spot near the main entrance where the smell of fresh bread filled the morning air. As he turned off the engine, I could see his hands trembling slightly. Whether from anger, anxiety, or exhaustion, I couldn't tell. "Remember," he said, turning to face me with desperate intensity burning in his eyes. "Whatever happens in there, you follow my lead. I do the talking. You stay quiet, respectful, and grateful for this opportunity." "Of course," I agreed, suppressing the irony of receiving such instructions about entering my own business investment. Tommy climbed out of the car and waited for me to join him on the sidewalk, breathing in the sweet aroma of baking bread. Together, we walked toward the glass doors that would open onto the final scene of our family drama. In less than 5 minutes, Tommy Cook would discover exactly who his mother really was. The glass doors of Chen's bakery opened with a cheerful chime, revealing the warm, cozy interior I hadn't seen in months but remembered fondly. The smell of fresh bread and sweet pastries filled the air like a welcoming hug. Tommy strode ahead confidently, nodding to the young cashier who smiled and waved us through toward the back kitchen area. Another irony, since I'd helped design the layout of this very bakery years ago. "Stay close and keep quiet," Tommy muttered as we entered the main workspace. "I'll handle all the talking with Robert." The kitchen bustled with morning activity. Bakers kneading dough, ovens heating up, the sounds and smells of a successful business in full swing. I recognized several faces, though they didn't seem to notice the elderly woman in dishwashing clothes walking behind an anxious young man. Tommy had picked up a dish towel and rubber gloves from a supply shelf, which he thrust into my hands with barely concealed satisfaction. "Here, make it look authentic when Robert sees you working," he said. I accepted the cleaning supplies without comment, internally amused at the theatrical nature of this final performance. Around us, the business of my bakery investment continued as usual. Orders being filled, customers being served, profits being earned from the partnership I'd helped create decades ago. "There he is," Tommy breathed, straightening his shoulders and adopting his most professional demeanor. Robert Chen was walking toward us from the office area, making his customary morning check of the kitchen operations. At 64, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of a successful small business owner. His graying hair neatly combed, his expression focused on ensuring everything ran smoothly. "Tommy," Robert called out, his voice carrying genuine warmth and friendship. "Perfect timing, my friend." Robert looked up from his clipboard, initially distracted by morning business, then focusing on Tommy with polite attention. His gaze moved briefly to me, a routine glance at the elderly dishwasher accompanying his friend. Then he stopped walking entirely, his eyes widening with recognition. "Tommy," Robert said slowly, his voice carrying a note of confusion and growing concern. "You brought her here?" "Yes, sir." Tommy's chest puffed with pride and satisfaction. "I solved our staffing problem and my family situation at the same time. Here's my mother, your new dishwasher." The words hung in the air like a challenge to common sense itself. Around us, other bakery workers continued their morning tasks, unaware of the drama unfolding in their peaceful workplace. Robert's face transformed through a spectrum of emotions: recognition, disbelief, and finally a cold fury that made the temperature in the warm kitchen seem to drop 10 degrees. "Tommy," Robert said, his voice deadly quiet and controlled, "do you have any idea what you've just done?" "Sir." Tommy's confidence began to waver as he registered Robert's expression of shock and growing anger. "You brought Margaret Wilson, one of the original investors in this bakery, into my kitchen with dish gloves in her hands, and you're standing there proud of yourself." The color drained from Tommy's face so quickly I thought he might faint right there on the kitchen floor. His mouth opened and closed soundlessly like a fish gasping for air in the bottom of a boat. "That's impossible," he whispered, his voice barely audible. 22 years ago, your mother invested $40,000 in my dream when this was just an idea in my head," Robert continued, his voice rising with each word. "Without her, there would be no Chen's bakery chain. Without her, there would be no job for you to lose, which you just did." "I don't understand," Tommy began weakly. "Then let me make it clear." Robert's words cut through the kitchen like a sharp knife, causing nearby bakers to stop and stare at the unfolding drama. "You're fired immediately. Clear out whatever personal items you have here and leave my property. Security will escort you out if necessary." Tommy stood frozen, his world collapsing around him with the speed and finality of a house of cards in a strong wind. His car keys slipped from nerveless fingers, hitting the tiled floor with a sharp clatter that echoed through the suddenly silent kitchen. Robert turned to me with genuine concern, the anger leaving his voice entirely as he addressed his old friend and business partner. "Margaret, my dear friend, what on earth is going on here?" I set down the dish towel and straightened to my full height, dropping the submissive posture I'd maintained for so long. When I spoke, my voice carried the authority and intelligence I'd kept hidden for days. "Robert, I think we need to have a private conversation in your office about family matters." Robert's office had always been a cozy reflection of success. Warm wood furniture, windows overlooking the bustling bakery floor, walls lined with awards and photographs documenting 22 years of business growth and achievement. As we entered, I noticed several pictures showing Robert and me together at various bakery openings and business celebrations. Evidence of a partnership Tommy had never known existed. Tommy followed us in like a sleepwalker, his face still ghostly pale from the kitchen revelation. He slumped into a chair uninvited, staring at his hands as if they belonged to someone else. "Margaret, please sit," Robert said, gesturing to the comfortable chair across from his desk, the same chair where I'd sat countless times discussing business strategy and expansion plans. "Can someone please explain to me why my business partner was just introduced to me as a dishwasher by her own son?" I settled into the familiar seat, feeling the weight of deception finally lifting from my shoulders like a heavy coat. "Robert, my family has been under the impression that I'm financially dependent on them. They've been quite uncharitable in their assessment of my worth and contribution." "Uncharitable?" Robert's voice sharpened with growing understanding. "Tommy, your mother owns 35% of this bakery chain. She's been quietly drawing profits for decades, not because she needs the money, but because that's how business partnerships work. What exactly did you think she did for a living all these years?" Christopher's voice came out as barely a whisper. "Phone company work, simple jobs." I thought she was struggling financially." "Struggling?" Robert laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Your mother could buy half the businesses in this neighborhood if she wanted to. She chose to live modestly, chose to let you believe she was having money troubles, and apparently chose to let you treat her like a burden on your family." The truth hung in the air between us like morning sunlight streaming through the office windows. 22 years of hidden success, finally exposed to the harsh light of reality. Through the windows, I could see the bakery floor bustling with activity, a view I'd helped Robert achieve through my early investment and continued partnership. "But why?" Tommy asked, looking directly at me for the first time since the kitchen confrontation. "Why didn't you tell me the truth?" "Because I wanted to see what kind of man you'd become without the influence of money," I replied calmly and clearly. "I wanted to know if you'd respect your mother for who she was, not what she owned. The answer, unfortunately, is that you wouldn't show basic human decency." Robert leaned back in his office chair, studying Tommy with undisguised distaste and disappointment. "Let me understand this situation correctly. You discovered your mother had lost her husband, and your response was to force her into minimum wage labor." "We couldn't afford," Tommy began desperately. "You couldn't afford." Robert's voice rose with incredulous anger. "Your mother has been supporting you your entire adult life. Trade school tuition, wedding expenses, house payments. Money that came from her share of this bakery's success, and you repaid that generosity by threatening to put her in a nursing home." Tommy's face crumpled as the full magnitude of his mistakes became crystal clear. "I didn't know. Nobody told me about any of this." "Nobody told you to be decent to your mother either," I said quietly but firmly. "Nobody told you to treat the woman who raised you with basic human respect and kindness. That should have come naturally to any good person." Robert stood up, moving to the window overlooking the bakery's main floor. "Margaret, what do you want me to do about this situation?" "Nothing that hasn't already been done," I replied with quiet satisfaction. "Justice has been served fairly. Tommy's friendship with you is over, as you've already announced. His wife faces criminal charges for tax fraud with the IRS, though that's a completely separate matter entirely." Tommy's head snapped up with sudden understanding. "You knew about Sarah's tax problems." "I know about everything, son. I always have." I stood as well, feeling taller and stronger than I had in years. "The question now is what you're going to do with this knowledge about who your mother really is." The office fell silent except for the distant sounds of a successful business continuing to operate in the building below us. Tommy sat surrounded by the evidence of success he'd never recognized, finally understanding that his mother wasn't the weak, dependent woman he'd imagined. Robert walked over and placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. "Margaret, you're always welcome here. This is your bakery as much as mine." "Thank you, Robert. But I think it's time I actually retired properly this time. On my own terms and my schedule." I looked at Tommy one final time with a mixture of sadness and hope. "Perhaps this experience will teach you something important about respect, humility, and the difference between being poor and choosing to live simply." Tommy opened his mouth as if to speak, then closed it again. There were no words that could undo what had been done, no apologies that could restore the trust that had been broken. As we prepared to leave the office, Robert held the door open for me like the gentleman he'd always been. "Justice has been restored," he said simply and with quiet satisfaction. "Indeed it has." After days of humiliation and threats, I was finally standing where I belonged, not as a burden or a charity case, but as Margaret Wilson, successful businesswoman, respected partner, and a woman who had learned the true value of dignity. The week after my husband's funeral had ended exactly as it should have, with truth revealed, respect restored, and justice served to those who deserved it most. If you enjoyed this story from Grandma Stories, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share your thoughts about Margaret's journey in the comments below. To listen to another heartwarming story, click on the video suggestion on your screen. Thank you for joining us today. And remember, never underestimate the wisdom and strength of a grandmother who's lived long enough to learn when kindness ends and justice begins.